Video recordings of this podcast can be found on raisingequity.org and Truth2Power on YouTube.
Welcome to Raising Equity. I'm Kira Hudson Banks, and this is a place where we think about issues of identity and equity. And we're doing this series on talking homophobia and heterosexism generally, but it came about because my one child, who's the oldest one, came to me and was sharing some of what was happening at school and some of the language he was hearing on his video games. And it made me think, do I know what to tell him? And so we started to talk about how he could stand up against homophobia. I started to explain to him the system of heterosexism. And then I realized, wait, hold up. Like, here I am, a cisgendered heterosexual woman talking to my son who is cisgendered and identifies as heterosexual. Like, we need to slow down and listen to the voices of people who have the lived experience of folks who identify as LGBTQ. And so one of the things I said to him is, we have people in our family and our lives that we know and that we care about who have these lived experiences. So why don't I reach out to them? Why don't I talk to them and hear about their experiences? They absolutely will have wisdom to share with us. And so that's how we got to this series. And so I've been talking to different folks about their experiences with homophobia and heterosexism, their experience of their sexual orientation. And I've just been really appreciative of their honesty and openness. So today we have with us Katie Hawk herself, and I really appreciate you coming, Katie.
Thank you.
I know Katie from the Ferguson Uprising.
Yep.
And it's amazing how that experience is one where, like, you're forever bonded.
Right.
Like, so we've never been at each other's homes, but we've been out in the streets connected.
Right.
We've developed relationship over Facebook and other things. And I'll forever feel connected regardless of the distance, because we went through such a tumultuous year or two or so.
Refining fire.
Yes.
Yeah,
so thanks for joining me.
Yeah, it's an honor.
Yeah. So any thoughts about what I shared with Avery, about just in general, like what you might tell him or me as his parent, like how we should be responding to heterosexism and homophobia, how we can be an ally, or as some people are calling, an accomplice?
Well, it is curious to me why kids tease around that. I mean, why that's and I think some curiosity around that might be in order. Like, why would someone make fun of someone who was gay, right? Why would that be a put down? Why is that and I mean, I think I have some curiosity about that with kids. I'm like, is that born of a fear, or is that born of right? And part of it is, I remember when my oldest, my firstborn, was little. I think they were 5 maybe, and they had a Barbie, and they had a couple Barbies, and they were upset they couldn't do a wedding because they only had girl Barbies. And I remember saying, well, why can't the girls get married? And they were like, what? Girls don't marry girls. And they were back, oh my gosh, this was late 90s, right? This was a long time ago. And I said, well, but what about so-and-so and so-and-so, our friends that were, a female couple? And Wynn was like, oh, that's what it is. Okay. So, giving it a name and a face, and actually Wynn is now grown and uses they, them pronouns, and is marrying another person who uses they, them pronouns. So it was the beginning of their busting all kinds of norms in their life.
Right. And busting that binary.
Yeah.
Right. Or the heteronormativity that they needed a man and woman Barbie to get married. Like, no, you need some love and some desire to be married.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It is curious. And I feel like it's curious and it's not, right? Because we know good and well that our society has all sorts of hatred towards LGBTQ folks. Right. And so, yes, I agree with kids to get curious, like, why would that be something to make fun of someone about?
Right.
And then where I found with Avery, like, we are lucky, and it sounds like you all were too, to have people in your lives,
Right.
right? Like I could point to couples in our lives who were, women, two women with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could point to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so in many ways, it was like our willingness to be open as adults and have
Right.
people in our lives who could model for them that this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also try to be really real with him to be like, okay, and I'm not naive that in society, there's a lot of judgment. In
There is.
churches, there's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of spaces that are not welcoming. And not to like just down on churches and religion, but religion has been used to control and condemn people for their sexual orientation.
Right. Religion is a key player in all of this. Yeah. And it's really complicated with religion. It's one of the few places, churches are one of the few places that have legal sanction to be bigots or to be discriminatory in any way they choose.
It's true.
It's really problematic. And there's, so I pastored churches for 23 years before stepping away. And 17 of them, 16 were in Webster Groves, right here in St. Louis. And when I came, it was in the middle 90s, 96. And we talked about, even then, should we become an open and affirming church? Should we, have this conversation as a church? And it was really contentious. Like, well, we'll just be welcoming, right? We'll just act our way into being, right? But if you can't say the words, right, and you can't stand up to the bigotry, and you can't change the systems, it just keeps going. So, ultimately, we did do the hard work, and we did do the vote, and we did. But what was interesting, it was many years later that I came out. I'd been there for a dozen years. Um, and when I did, initially the church was very supportive because, we were open and affirming. So we had the structure in place. So that really is key. The structure was there. So of course we're going to say it's okay that Katie's gay, right?
Right.
Right. So we did. And the church was okay. And so it worked, except that you can change the structure, but it doesn't automatically change people's hearts. So it's a both and. So when I actually married Dar and I had a wife and not a husband, there were people that just couldn't make the switch. They just couldn't make the switch. So.
And that's a beautiful story well, no, not beautiful in the fact that people couldn't get themselves together, but a beautiful example of how it is both and, right? Like, so you did the work before you were out to say, no, it's not okay to just say we are open. Like, we need to have it in our policy, have a vote, have an institutional mandate to say we are open. Right? Because we know that policy is important within systems. Those rules and norms guide our actions. And sometimes attitudes can follow that.
Right.
And sometimes they don't.
And sometimes they don't.
And people have to catch up.
Yeah.
Gosh, Katie, so it sounds like as much as you love the church and have pastored churches.
Yeah, I have.
That it has also been a site of pain for you around your sexual orientation.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that in this most recent foray into the church, that ended almost as quickly as it started, it was just enough for me to remember how much I love preaching and teaching. I just love it. I taught school for 5 years after leaving the church, and it was okay. I'm not good at it. My wife is fabulous at it, but I'm not, but when I stepped into the pulpit, I was home. That is my call. When I lifted up the bread, I had the words. It's who I am, right? I believe Jesus about God, right? But the church is difficult. The church is really difficult.
Can you tell us a little bit about this latest foray and just give a quick summary?
Well, it was really weird. I had a fabulous interview with a search committee to do a temporary. So if it's not a called position, the whole congregation doesn't have to vote. So it was the search committee and the council deciding. And the idea was that I would be there for 3 months for sure, and hopefully then renew after that, and perhaps be their called pastor, right? And it was very part-time, and it was rural Illinois. And I had been in a rural church in southern Michigan for several years early on and loved it, and really enjoyed trying to make the transitions in that setting. So I was familiar and looking forward to it and excited, and I preached and had great fun and lots of positivity after the service. And then I was called on Thursday. So that was Sunday. I was called on Thursday and told there was a problem, that apparently there's a bylaw that they can't have a gay pastor. And I was called on Friday and told that, yep, we're going to part ways. And I said, are you firing me? And he said, yeah, I don't like that word, but that's what it is. And I said, because I'm gay. And he said, yeah, I feel really bad about it, but yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, so many words and
I
so
know.
many questions. The fact that he would be honest in some ways,
Right.
I'm like, I guess I appreciate that.
Right. So the context is like my profile went to probably half a dozen churches in rural Illinois. They're the only ones that interviewed me. So I'm pretty sure the others are equally unwelcoming. What was odd is that they thought they were ready for me.
Oh, so the committee knew
that I was gay?
That you were gay.
Oh, yeah, we even talked about it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure they knew their bylaws.
I don't know if they realized that was in their bylaws.
Oh, so here we go again. Like, what's in your policy and all of that
Right.
matters. So they might not have even been aware. They might have.
I don't think they were aware.
So individually, as a hiring group, the committee, they were willing to be open and right, but someone else was not.
Right. Yeah.
How did you feel?
I was devastated. And part of it was that I'd had just enough time to realize that this really is what I love doing. And also the certainty that there is no place to do that in this area of the country anyway, and in a pre-existing church, right? So if I'm going to do it, I'm going to have to start something. And so it was, I think that was the part that was most hurtful, that I really wanted to do the work and can't. And it's something I'm really good at. You know how you know when you're really good at something?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah.
I mean, it hurts my heart. It makes me angry.
Yeah.
And it speaks to, unfortunately, like so many people think it's 2019. That doesn't happen anymore.
Right? I just kept thinking, you can't fire me because I'm gay. Well, I guess you just did.
I guess you just did. And I guess as a religious institution, you can.
Yeah.
And we're in Missouri. I know you said this was not Missouri, but we don't have gender and sexual orientation protections in this state.
Right.
And we're not the only one.
Right.
So I think it's important for people to hear your experience, as devastating as it is, to understand this still happens.
Oh, it does. What was unusual about it, like I said, there were several churches that won't even have a conversation with me. One of them said, well, maybe you could apply for our position because you wouldn't live here, right? No one would need to know.
And I imagine that the hurt from an institution that you love is one thing, but then also this like message that you should hide part of yourself or that like when you came out, and you mentioned coming out while you were pastoring, so I imagine you were older in life.
I'm a late bloomer.
Mm-hmm. And so I'd be curious if you're open with sharing. Like, there clearly were other things that kept you from being fully who you are before coming out in the church. And so then to have the sight of harm to be this place that
I thought was safe.
that you thought was safe, that loved you, that you were able to grow and serve.
Yeah, I think that is what makes it so hard. One of my early awarenesses of that I might be gay, it was in seminary. We had this month intensive of human sexuality with the University of Minnesota and our seminary and some Lutheran school, I guess. Anyway, so this intensive sexuality month. And I was at lunch with some classmates, and I was standing next to a woman, and I'm ordering my food at McDonald's, and all of a sudden I realized that the emotion, that the feeling I had was attraction. And I was horrified because like, well, that's okay for them. That's okay for those. That's okay for you. But I want to be a pastor, you know? And I had already like studied my way out of fundamentalism and into the United Church of Christ that accepts women, right? But even though in theory we accepted people who were gay, this was the 1980s. You could never work if you were gay, right? So I was just like, oh, that can't be me. That can't be me. That can't be me, right?
Oh, gosh. So you had that awareness as you were studying.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, yeah.
But you were married.
But I wasn't yet. But
okay.
I stuffed that down. Oh, I stuffed that one deep. And then I married a family friend who loved the church. And he loved the church. So, yeah.
So that worked. He loved the church. You loved the church.
It worked.
But you had buried so much.
Yes. And the thing about it is I was born in 1962. So, I mean, when I was born, it was illegal and you would be institutionalized. And I mean, it wasn't an option. I asked the most liberal friend in junior high, what if, she was goth before there was goth, right? And she was like, oh, you just better hope you're not, Katie. Right. So, I mean, that was when I grew up.
So you had an awareness when you were in junior high.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But stuff it, right?
Right. But you stuff it.
But stuff it. And so if you're stuffing all that stuff, you have to do something with it. I mean, so, Jesus is a good antidote maybe, but that only worked for so long. Then there was, foray into trying to stuff it with drinking, and that worked until it didn't. And yeah, so.
Yeah. And it's natural. It's natural for kids to have an awareness of their sexuality and having two kids who are developing and growing. Like that's part of why I have felt like ill-equipped in having this conversation with Avery, with my kids, but also like I have to talk to people who've been through this experience because I'm watching them and I'm like, I want them to grow up in a world where they get to be their most authentic self. So they feel those feelings for someone who's the same gender and the same pronouns, that they know that that's okay.
Right.
And yet we live in this world where it's not.
And it probably is no coincidence that my own finally reckoning with who I am happened when my kids were middle and high school, right?
Really?
Yeah. And I think that is part of it, is I'm encouraging them to be their most authentic selves. It was really pushing my own buttons. So I'm sure all of that coincides.
Oh, I'm sure. Kids are such good teachers.
Aren't they?
Oh, yeah, hard.
Yeah.
Good and hard teachers.
Yeah.
Ugh. If you could tell your developing middle school, high school self some words of wisdom, what would you say?
Oh, be your most authentic self. Be who you are. I mean, whoever you are. It's not like I chose to be gay. I chose to hide, right? That's the choice. It's not like I have a gay lifestyle. We have a fireplace and a dog and a cat, and actually too many cats. But right, I mean, we have just a life, right?
Right.
whoever it is that we are, whoever we're most attracted to, whatever um, most genuine expressions of sexuality and gender, and I mean, that's who we were created to be, right? And our faith, our spiritual health depends on us being our most authentic self, right? I mean, I know religion has all kind of rules, but our spirit has to get in touch with that most authentic self. So that's what I would tell my early self, to be who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I want for all of us,
Mhm.
especially for kids who they haven't been as
Mhm.
socialized into our rules, whether it's through
They
religion or
haven't.
school or whatever, right?
Right.
So they've been in it for some years, right? But they still have, I think, the ability to like see things differently than the way they are, to
Mhm.
dream because they don't know all the ins and outs and politics of
They
everything.
don't.
And so that's part of what I want to do with Raising Equity is try to help adults understand concepts of identity and oppression and systemic, all of that stuff, so that they can help kids understand what's happening in the world. And they're at this developmental stage where they could maybe create something different.
And it is interesting how much we put on them that they don't already have. One of the things, Blue, our teen, came home. He works at Squires, and he came home from work in a shower yesterday, and he was just like kind of mortified. It was a reveal shower, I think. It was all about the gender of the coming baby, right? And the gender is being defined by an ultrasound, I'm guessing, based on visible genitalia, I'm guessing, right?
Right.
So it's like all this stuff that's being put on this baby that isn't even born yet. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so how can we help them to see what's happening so
Mhm.
that maybe they can choose to, it's not even not be of it because we're of it, but in it, but not of
To be
it,
aware
to
of,
be aware, right?
yeah, of
That
when we're putting something on somebody that may not. For years, I knew. I'm trying to think. I think it was 5 years that I knew that I was a lesbian before I was able to say it out loud in public.
Mm.
I said it to the people I was closest to, but it took a long, long time. Um, and in those years, I was cognizant that I never said I'm heterosexual.
Yes.
I never said that. And in fact, sometimes people would say something to me, and I would say, don't assume I'm heterosexual, right? That's not a box, don't assume I'm in that box. But the heteronormativity, and I think you spoke of that earlier, is so strong in our culture that even if you don't say, if you, it's just assumed that you're straight unless you come out as gay,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. And that's part of in talking to Avery is part of what I was saying. Like
Mhm.
he identifies as heterosexual and we've had this conversation, right? In
Mhm.
terms of attraction and so I said, I actually think that being heterosexual, you have a responsibility to see the privilege that you have.
Mhm.
And that's part of why I need you to not just not be okay with homophobic comments. I need you to not just not participate, right?
Right.
Like I need you to think about how you leverage your privilege, your heterosexual privilege, the privilege of just being quote unquote straight and normal, right? Because I don't like the term straight because like I feel like then that means everything else is crooked. What I don't right I want to try to make visible
Mhm.
because I want people to be able to be their full selves. And yeah, I mean we both have that hope.
Yeah.
And it's like how do we raise kids so that it could be a reality? How do we create spaces so that you can be your full self and not get fired?
Oh, right.
Right? Like I don't even have any words, Katie. I really don't. And yet we've talked about this and one of the things that you said that made me really stepped back was this piece around having had the keys to privilege
Yeah. Yeah.
and then not.
And then not. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, like interpersonally, one of my ahas was um, holding hands with Dar, walking to the restaurants in Webster Groves, around town, and the looks we would get, and it was like, what? I mean, you're like, we're holding hands. I mean, couples hold hands all the time, right? But that was like in a interpersonal way. But I think professionally, it's been stunning because if it weren't for the fact that I'm gay, I would have a preaching gig every single Sunday and then some, right? And I don't want to work full time. I'm retired and want to be retired, but nobody will even, I mean, nobody even wants a gay pastor even for one Sunday, right? Because, well, I don't know the because, but it's just really stunning to me. And I look back and I think, when I had the privilege cards, did I do enough?
Mm.
I don't know. In some ways, I feel really good. Like we helped this church become open and affirming, and we welcomed all kinds of queer couples. And we took that wedding bus. We took a whole bus of us from church up to Iowa to get married, right? Because we couldn't do that in Missouri. And so, on the one hand, I feel like we did some really good stuff. On the other hand, as soon as I had a wife by my side, it was pretty clear I needed to leave the church. It was.
Was it said to you as plainly as this recent firing?
No. It was much more like you would expect, much more like all of a sudden, the person who had helped me work on this theological frame, we were using a real progressive theological frame. She was really kind of my mentor in many ways, but she all of a sudden began saying it was heresy and wanted the council to turn me in for heresy. And I didn't even know we had heresy in the United Church of Christ. So yeah, it was much more like that backdoor, I'm going to find a reason to quietly get rid of you.
Mm-hmm.
And there were, the vast majority of people were really cool and supportive, and the people in the governance were cool and supportive, but there were dragons circling, conflict brewing. And
Mm-hmm.
But what I thought was interesting is I thought I had done enough in this place. I thought, right? But it didn't obviously work for me. But I thought, well, they're in a good place. Now they're going to search for a new pastor, and they hired a straight pastor. So I don't know if I did enough. There are people. One of my seminary classmates, who was the most gifted student in our class, was openly gay, and he was a mentor way back then, and is even today. But he couldn't. We graduated from seminary. I got scooped up. I had jobs. I had a great career. He couldn't get a job. He worked for the denomination for a while. He took an inner city church that had 12 members finally, and he actually, once he got that church, it turned it into something beautiful, and it blossomed, and he blossomed, and he then moved to another church, and he's doing great now,
Mm-hmm.
right? But he really, but meanwhile,
He deserved more.
oh my
He
gosh, he
deserved
was
more,
the
and
most gifted student in our class. And so now, he's the one supporting me,
Mm.
and it's kind of like, well, but I had all those benefits all those years. I had the career, right? So it's just kind of interesting.
I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing with us, reflecting out loud with us, because this is a recent hurt. And so I just want to honor that and appreciate that out loud. And I hope that people got from it not only like gain some compassion and understanding, but also will do something with that. Like, so whether it's leveraging your privilege, if you've got those cards now, or if it's, learning your church bylaws and maybe trying to change them. Because I know, for example, like the Methodist Church has a conference that's coming up. They have a big decision around
do.
being accepting, gay affirming, right? And I'm sure other churches are having these conversations. I know not all of them are, but where they are, how can you be a part, if you're a part of the church community, how can you be a part of trying to shift the culture and policy?
It's the Malcolm, it's Martin Luther King Jr.'s The White Liberal, the problem of the white liberal. The people who hired me, knowing that I was gay, were not themselves bigots or, whatever. I mean, they knew who I was, but they couldn't handle the conflict.
That
Right?
came.
They couldn't handle the conflict that came. And I think that's one of the privileges of being heterosexual is to be free of conflict. Whereas if you're queer, there's going to be conflict. We don't get a choice about that.
Well, and they caved to the heteronormativity, the heterosexism, and that was their default. So the question is how do we change the default?
Right.
Because if they don't have the guts to stand up against the status quo, how do we change the status quo? Well, I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us on Raising Equity. Hopefully you have followed our series about heterosexism and homophobia and have not only gained some knowledge, but also some compassion and understanding for people who have the lived experience of having experienced heterosexism and homophobia. So those who identify as LGBTQ, I just want to name that it's a gift when people share their stories with you. And so I hope that you've received that gift and have listened deeply.